Right. Okay, so tonight's class is a bit of a doctrinal class again, and we're going to talk about this topic, word you might hear or refer to, the Nephilim. Going to do a bit of a deep dive just to get a good grip on this because, as you'll see as we go along, this topic comes up quite often with people in terms of whether they believe, there are whatever lots of different things they believe about the heavenly realms and mysterious things and fallen angels and all these kind of things. So let's go and have a look then at uh, this topic, and then we will see quite a few interesting things. I'm trying to keep it short and as coherent and understandable as possible. So let's see. I'm going to quickly put off my video. So we're gonna look at this verse, and a lot of you have seen it and looked at this. Genesis 6 verse 4, where it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which are of old, men of renown. So as is our custom that we always aim for, is to really look at the text and context, and then also look at the meaning of the words and see where we go from there. Now, the first two things we want to really focus on is the word giants in this verse, and that's where this term Nephilim comes from, because the Hebrew word for giants is the word Nephil, and it really boils down to being someone who is a feller, makes things to fall, a bully or a tyrant. It's the idea carried with that word. So someone who's big, and obviously then, a bully or a tyrant, right? And notice that this term only appears in the Bible twice. In Genesis 6 verse 4 here, and then in Numbers 13:33, where we'll go to just now. So that's the first thing we want to notice. Then mighty men has the idea from Hebrew, the word gibor, and it really means someone powerful, by implication a warrior or a tyrant, champion, chief, a strong man. And it comes from the root word that real from Hebrew 1397, which really has this idea of a valiant warrior. And that word appears in your King James 159 times, of which it is translated 136 times as mighty, and the word is translated as valiant 6 times, and then very other words, but very few times. So the word is mostly translated as mighty. Okay, so in the Hebrew, it would be there were Nephilim in the earth those days, and these men became Gibor, mighty men, right? So first of all, if we talk about giants, which giants comes to mind when you hear the word and you think in biblical terms? I'm sure most of you would have thought, first of all, Goliath, most famous giant that was slain by David. And then also notice that this becomes, for later, this is going to become very important. The 10 spies that came back after the 12 spies went and scouted out the promised land, they were afraid of the giants in the land. There were giants in the land, and they therefore, not being faithful, doubted, and didn't want to go and take the land. The other two spies, Joshua and Caleb, believed that God could slay the giants. A second note I want to make here, which I think not too many people think about, is it is interesting that when we look at the erroneous doctrines, wrong doctrines, whatever you want to call them, They are often based on words and phrases that appear very little in the Bible. So this word Nephilim, people make wrong conclusions about that, and they only appear twice, and then they build Christendom basically builds their whole idea of what religion is on the theme of what they think Nephilim means. But the word just appears twice. Doctrine of the Trinity, word Trinity doesn't appear in the Bible. Um, people who believe in Satan being a fallen angel, the word Satan only appears 19 times. If you take um, Job out the picture, only actually 5 times. And so, these major doctrines that give people Bible belief or their Bible view of what the gospel is, um, and that we are often ridiculed for because we don't go there. They are based on phrases and a few verses in the Bible where they do not consider the overall much more conclusive evidence of other points in the Bible and principles that actually have a lot of references that we can turn to. So that's just a very interesting thought that comes to mind. Right, so here are I've listed 10 translations just to show you how they translate these words. In most cases, the blue Gibor mighty men idea is translated pretty consistently as mighty men. Only in the New Living Translation do they make it famous warriors. And then the giants in the King James Version, in the American Standard Bible, they replace it with the actual Hebrew word Nephilim. In the New Literal Translation, they try and cover both by saying the giant Nephilites. The Nephilim in the Complete Jewish Bible. Now, here it gets interesting because the CEV, which is definitely a bad translation, they just went straight out for what the Christendom believes, the children of the supernatural beings. And married these women, became famous heroes and warriors. They were called Nephilim and lived on the earth, right? So they just add this, that they believe these Nephilim were the children of they were supernatural beings, and we'll see just now where that comes from. The NIV is pretty good as so is the ASB. The CSB Bible makes it powerful men. The ESV is quite a good translation, the Nephilim and mighty men. And then the Message Bible kind of have a good idea as to letting us know what this means in the structure of this. It says this was back in the days and also later when there were giants in the land. The giants came from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These were mighty men of ancient law, famous ones. Okay, so except for one translation, most of the translations are pretty good in dealing with the translations to stay with the Hebrew or the actual meaning of the word. So let's just look at a verse again and paraphrase it so we actually don't make the mistake some people do by identifying the wrong parties that are spoken about here and identifying them wrong, confusing them. So basically, if we're going to be paraphrasing this, we get to what the verse is saying, that there were giants, Nephilim, at a certain time, and we'll get to that time in those days. And after those days, they were still there, and they were mighty men. So the beginning of the word, they were giants in the earth in those days. And the last part, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown, is referring to the same group of people. So these giants were the result of sons of God. There's another group having sexual relations with the daughters of men. So there's another group. So we have basically 3 groups of people here: the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the giants that came about because of the first 2 marrying, and so forth. Right. So what does Christendom believe? They believe the sons of God, many many not all Christian denominations, but majority of them, that the sons of God refers to fallen angels, the angels and fallen angels that came down and had sexual relations with women that produced superhuman beings called Nephilim. So if you search on the internet, this is the kind of images, and there's lots of them and weirder ones, and it is just amazing what kind of conjecture and theories and ideas are out there about things that are not in the Bible, and people are trying to always make the Bible a lot more mysterious and supernatural than it actually is. And this is the beauty of being in the truth. You don't get carried away and go and off track and believe things that do not exist. All right, so here is if you look on YouTube and you search for Nephilim, this is the kind of pictures you'll get, and you'll see at the top here, it says Bible, the first one, Bible stories, get ready to dive into the darkest and most forgotten age of mankind. Before the flood, before Moses, there was a generation, so it goes on. And lovely stuff that all Hollywood and all the movie makers borrow from, and you always get these images, and people always think religion is all about this kind of thing. So these people, the AI Bible, imagine. We made a short film about the Nephilim. Who were they? Giants in the Bible. This video explores the most mysterious and controversial passage this in the Bible. So having said that, I just want you to also note there is a book of Enoch that is referred to in our Bible once in the New Testament, and a lot of people go to that book and say to understand what these passages are that speak about fallen angels and so on. You will get a better understanding if you read the book of Enoch. The problem there, the main problem with that idea or way of trying to figure this out is that we go outside of the Bible to interpret the Bible, and we know that is not a good idea. The Bible should interpret itself. Then you will come to the right answer. And unfortunately, for those who love drama and all kinds of special effects in the movie and that, I'm afraid you ain't gonna get it in the Bible. So here is a kind of a warning that Paul taught Titus, and in the book of Enoch there is a lot of genealogies and things that person who ever wrote the book tries to prove where these beings come from and so on. But we are warned that we should not give heed to fables and endless genealogies that just will bring up more and more questions and not answers, and a lot of different theories. But rather we should give attention to godly edifying, which is in faith. So do. And the most important thing about the correct interpretation of this verse and the principles is to get us away from these rabbit holes and wrong kind of idea about God, and get the right idea about what God is, what his plan is, and then to get the kind of lessons that will make us more godly people and living more like Jesus. So what you believe will impact what you do and how your view is of the Bible and the gospel message. Again, in Titus, avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law. They are unprofitable and vain. Okay, so a quick comparison then. If we look at Christendom in connection with this verse and the way they interpret it, it borders on this idea of very mysterious and like myths. Very much a lot of people do attack Christianity and I think they've got some justification for do so, that we are also paganistic in our beliefs because we have this idea of divine beings like angels having sexual relationships and relations with humans. That is definitely what the paganist views are all about. Uh, they also see that it's a battle between good, God, and evil, either Satan's and the demons. And, it's all very spectacular, these beings that are so powerful and all these things. And it's kind of complicated and mysterious. And the focus is on the opposing superpowers, God and Satan and the demons and the Nephilim and all that, trying to win the souls of men, and God trying to win the souls of men to his side. Um, Mankind is not all that bad because we have to deal with the odds heavily stacked against us because we are not so powerful and these other beings are. So, you can see where the focus lies, what religion is all about. And the Bible truth is quite different. First of all, nothing is mythical, there's no mysteries. We look at the text, it's concrete, and with our logic and good, sound Bible study, you can understand and come, like God said in Timothy, he wants all people to come to a knowledge of the truth to be saved. Right. So um, we do not have these pagan kind of nuances in our religion. We believe there's only one God, the Father, and the way Jesus was born was by miraculous conception through God's power, the Holy Spirit. As much as God can do a miracle with his power, uh, lots of miracles that we've witnessed and seen in the Bible, he could also work above nature so that a virgin woman became pregnant without having to have sexual intimacy with a heavenly being at all. So then our focus is the battle is between God and man. To reconcile mankind to God is the whole purpose of God. Um, there is we know in heaven there's no enemies. God is the only power there. There's peace in heaven. God's will is done there. And it's all about this battle of God to bring man back to him, reconcile him because of sin that separated him from God. We really I think that sometimes the problem for other people, our religion or beliefs might seem to them to be too simplistic, but it's definitely logic and there's no mysteries. The focus is on the only and all-powerful God and Jesus, and our God will be all in all once he set up the kingdom. And then maybe this is one of the hardest things for people to get to accept, that what the focus after God and Jesus should be on ourselves, as our sinful nature being the main enemy we face, and that is the only thing that can keep us out of the kingdom. We are responsible for our sins. There's no other powers that be that can tempt us or make our lives difficult and so on. So that's just an idea to give you right, because it will definitely impact the way we live our lives. So if you look at the Bible truth, I have to say, sorry, it's just a book without any pictures and special effects, but the message in the book is profound. And once we dig deeper into the Bible, it is mind-blowing, fascinating to understand and learn who God is, what his plan is, what he has done and is doing right now, and he will still do to bring it to completion. And this book will always bring us face to face with our destiny, that is the dust, and whether we're going to make a choice for or against God. If we choose God, obviously we have the hope of the resurrection. If we choose against God, we will die in the grave and never exist again. Right, so let's get back to Genesis 6, verse 4 again. So let's really look at these verses. When it says there were giants in the earth in those days, What is referred to? Well, in Genesis 4, we read of Cain and Abel, and then Cain, you can see here, genealogy had a son Enoch, and he had a son Irad, and then Majahil, Methuselah, and Lamech. And if we look at, not time today, but if you look at these people, Lamech, for instance, these are very ungodly men. And there's a theme there, because in Genesis 4, at the end, we have Seth that is born again after Cain slays Abel. Eve had another son, Seth, and Seth had a son, Enos. And at the end of Genesis 4, it says, in the time of Enos, men started calling on the name of God. And then we have the flood, right? So we see in context of the chapters before, we are talking of days when we already have a distinction between two groups of people. The sons of God, like I'm going to show you, is the same as men calling on the name of God. And then another line of people from the line of Cain who are the ungodly people. And we have this theme in the Bible. There are always going to be two kinds of people, right from Genesis 3, the seed of the serpent, the people who do not follow God, and then the seed of the one that will crush the serpent, eventually Jesus. And that theme fits well with the right interpretation of this verse, as we'll see soon. And that is really what the Bible is about. God and man, and in mankind, two kind of people, those who are faithful, those who are not. And that theme just starts right off in Genesis 3, and it carries on all through the Bible. That's where the focus is. The focus is on God and what he's doing with men on the earth, not about some battles in heaven and beings flying around there and giving God all kinds of trouble and so on. Right. After that will be after the flood, right? But we're going to see in the Bible at the end here that these giants, Nephilim, there's a certain time in the Old Testament when they were no more. They cease to exist, interesting enough. They are not fallen angels that kept on existing and are in the heavenly realms there causing trouble, right? So here's the main thing about the sons of God. This is where people go astray. And let's just look at this. The sons of God is a term that appears in the Bible 11 times. Now, here in Genesis 6, verse 2 and 4, the verse on the screen here, you have to decide, who are we talking about here? Are the sons of God referring to angels, or are they referring to people, right? Believers, faithful people. So, of the 11 times, if we take Genesis 6, verse 2 and 4 out of the picture for now, because we're trying to figure out from the others, we have in Job 1, verse 6 and Job 2, verse 1, we know that the sons of God came to present them before the Lord. That is a term in the Old Testament showing people on earth worshiping before God, like we do now when we go to meetings on Sunday. We present ourselves before God. Doesn't mean we're physically with him. We're here on earth. So Job, twice in Job in the beginning, we know the sons of God refers to worshippers on earth. Job 38 verse 7 speaks of angels. So the term sons of God is used ones of angels. In John 1 verse 12 in the New Testament, and in Romans 8, and in Philippians 2, and in 1 John 3, it always talks of true believers who become the sons of God. So 8 out of the 10 of the verses speak of faithfully and faithful godly men. So if you really want to build your doctrine, you got to choose. Go for 8 out of the 10 verses, or go for one verse in Job 38 verse 7 to make up your mind about the verses in Genesis 6 And again, like I stated in the beginning, people will take one verse and then build their conclusions on that. What about the other 8 out of the 10? Note also the first time angels are mentioned in the Bible is only in Genesis 16, 10 chapters on from here, when Hagar is in the wilderness and an angel brings her a message. So it's interesting that up to Genesis 16, all we actually always read about is God and his um, interaction with men on the earth. Right. And then when we talk about these mighty men of renown, we find in the Bible they are mentioned again. For example, a person like Nimrod, he was a mighty one in the earth. And these men, you read of them, they are mighty and they're well known, and they always against God. They're ungodly, unfaithful. So everything in the verse speaks of men and nothing about angels. Right. So here's a very strong connection between calling on the name of God that makes you a son of God. So in the end of Genesis 4, when we read that when Seth, after Seth was born, people started calling on the name of God, we can understand that shortly after that, in context, we are now talking of the sons of God, which are godly people that go and marry the daughters of men. There's an intermingling of faithful and unfaithful people, and that brings disaster. So look at these verses you can put together to show the strong connection between calling on the name of God, and that makes you a son of God. In Romans 8, 10 verse 8, Paul says, but what does it say? The word is nigh you, even in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach, that if you will confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and shall believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart man believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth he confession is made unto salvation. For whosoever, in verse 13, shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So to call upon the name of the Lord is to take on the saving name of God, to know that name, to mention it, to talk about it, what it means, and understanding what God's name is all about. And Jesus has got God's name. So every time you say Jesus, you say Joshua, you're saying Yah saves. You are always using the name of God. You are proclaiming the name of God every time you say Jesus, right? So John 1 verse 12 says, but as many as received him, to him he gave power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. There's the connection. When you believe in the name of God, you're a son of God. And it says in Romans 10, 8 and up to 13, when you believe, it's in your heart, and then your heart, what the heart's full of, you will speak. So then it becomes a confession from your mouth, right? And you will be saved if you call on the name of the Lord, and you are sons because you believe in that name. Right. So to believe in Jesus' name entails an understanding that God saves. That's what the name means. And Jesus and the kingdom are the ways in which God is going to make save people and have them live life eternal in the kingdom. So when you understand that God saves you, you will take on that saving name of God, and you will preach about the name and what it means, and you will live a life that honors God's reputation, his name, and his character. And so when the Bible talks about sons of God, straight after Seth is in a generation that starts calling on the name of God, it is clear that they are the sons of God referred to there. Okay, so I'm gonna be short on the first 3 and a little more elaboration on number 4. Yes, 4 approaches. There's quite a few more, but we just gonna do these 4 today. There are 4 approaches to interpret Genesis 6 verse 1 correctly. First, the textual. Some of it we've done already now. You look at the text and see what it means, what the words mean. Then there's the context, and I want to just share a few ideas on that. A micro context idea of, if you just look at the book of Genesis, it becomes clear what the verse means and what it can't mean. Then there's these things like we call allusions or chiasms, which refers to the structure of the Hebrew text. And even that, I'll show you one slide, alludes to the fact that the focus is all on men on earth. It's got nothing to do with angels in Genesis 6, verse 1 to 5. And I think the most, I would say, best evidence that the right approach to Genesis 6, verse 1 to 5 has got nothing to do with angels is what actually happened to the Nephilim, and that's what we'll end off with. Right, so notice if if you look at the text, it is interesting. A big clue in Hebrew text is repetition. And in Genesis 6, 1 to 7, notice the one thing that is repeated over and over again. Men, man, men, 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 man, just everywhere. It's all about God. When man began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them. And God says, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he's also flesh. Why is God so preoccupied with man if this passage speaks about these supernatural, very powerful, disobedient, fallen angel beings that's giving God so much grief? Then why doesn't this if this chapter is about these fallen angels coming and invading the earth and having sexual relations with women, why is God saying nothing about that? He's just focused on man and his wickedness. No, nothing mentioned about these beings and what God's going to do with them. The real problem then started with these more powerful beings that came and invaded our space here. But God doesn't address them. Surely, you would think that he will address those powerful beings much faster and before he even comes to men. But there's nothing about that. It's all God and his interaction with man, and that it grieved him, it said in verse 6, it repented Yahweh that he made man on earth, and it grieved him in his heart. It doesn't say it grieved God that the angels he made began this rebellious and now they make causing havoc in his cosmos. No, it's all about man on earth. So even in the text, the repetition is screaming at you that there's nothing else to be found there. All right. That's just what I'm sort of saying at the bottom here. Okay, let's look at Genesis. I want to run you through Genesis quickly. Genesis 1, let us, the Elohim, make man. We know that verse. Elohim, if you study it later in the Bible, can either refer to God himself or the angels. Yes, the angels are always doing God's will. And here, God can either be inviting the angels to come and create with him, or it could mean that the angels said, let us all together on God's behalf do creation. Okay, so there are two options here, which are both very plausible, but doesn't speak anything of Nephilim or fallen angels. Genesis 2, after creation, notice everything was good. There was no sin in the world after God created Adam and Eve in day 7. There was no sin, right? Even when the serpent came, everything was still good. But that animal, the serpent, is defined specifically again in the Bible as an animal craftier than all the other animals. And then sin entered the world through Adam's disobedience. The serpent did not get the same punishment that Adam and Eve did, mortality. He was cursed, right? Because he was already mortal. Right. So that's a whole big study in itself. But in Genesis 3, again, if you study correctly, you'll see it has got nothing to do with a fallen angel that was disobedient. And then in Genesis 4, we have Cain's descendants versus the sons of God calling on his name. Genesis 5, genealogy of sons of men. So the theme of the faithful becoming unequally yoked with the ungodly is there from the beginning, especially from Genesis 4 and 5. And if you just look at that context, you'll see the focus is never ever in what Christendom says, right? Even Genesis 6, man is continually evil in God, sends a flood to destroy all but Noah and the 8 of them in the ark. Genesis 10, again, the nations from Noah, man populates the earth. And then we have the Tower of Babel, where man is trying to be God and builds this huge tower and everything connected with that. And they are scattered through language. All the emphasis in Genesis, the seed part of the Bible, is always just God and man, and the way that man keeps on disobeying God, and God is going to bring it all back together through his son Jesus. From Genesis 12, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and there is no mention nor warning regarding any fallen angels as man's most dangerous enemy and God's greatest arch enemy in all of Genesis, and for that matter in all of the Old Testament. All right, here's just one example of the structure of the text that also gives us this idea how the focus is what we found when we looked at the word studies and the actual textual exposition of the verse. In this piece of Hebrew literature has got this structure. They I can't remember exactly what they call it. This is not a chiasm, but it's something similar. But what it does, you can see it in verse 1 and 2, it speaks of men that began to multiply, right? And the sons of God saw the daughters of men. By the way, again, an allusion to Eve, who saw that the fruit is good, like the serpent says, right? Then the Lord speaks in verse 3, and it talks then in verse 4 about the mighty men. And then that pattern repeats itself in verse 5. The Lord saw the wickedness of man on the earth. The Lord speaks, and now we have a righteous man, Noah, coming about to counter these mighty men and be different from them. And actually, he is saved, and God starts again after the flood. So even in the structure of the text, you can see where the focus is. All right, so now we're going to end off with what I find quite fascinating. What happens to the Nephilim, and what message regarding the gospel message of God's salvation through Jesus does it empathize? Right, so we saw that in the days of, before the flood, that these Nephilim referred to men that were strong and giants and tall and very famous. And they came about because faithful and unfaithful people intermarried. And there's one lesson already that I'll just quickly mention is when faithful and ungodly people marry and mix, the result will always be that the ungodly people get the better deal because things will go more their way. It's very difficult for the faithful people not to be overcome by the world. So the whole theme in the Bible is come out of the world. Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers and all that. So we might as well take that lesson and understand that if we're going to compromise our beliefs and mix in the wrong places, we will be the ones that lose while the evil and the ungodly continue to prosper. So just keep that in mind. So what happened after the flood? For that, we're going to Numbers. This is the second time only in the Bible, twice, where the Nephilim are mentioned. Now notice what happened. In Numbers, the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. This is the 10 spies now with Joshua. They brought, verse 32, an evil report on the land which they had searched. So it says they saw that in it were men of great stature, height, They saw the Nephilim there, the giants, the sons of Anak, which came from these giants. And we in our own sight are grasshoppers. Right. So what do we learn from this? Even in Deuteronomy 9, verse 1, it says, Hear, O Israel, you are to pass over Jordan this day, to go and possess the nations greater and mightier than yourself, cities great and fenced up to heaven, a people great and tall, the children of the Anakims, which you know, and of whom you have heard. Who can stand before the children of Anak? So Anak was a descendant from the Nephilim, from the giants we've read about earlier. And the type of men that made the world so bad that God had to clean it with a flood was now again in the promised land that Joshua had to conquer. So the Nephilim's physical traits of Genesis 6 continued after the flood in the land of Canaan. Now, why is it called the land of Canaan? Because Ham, after Noah, one of his sons, Ham, was the father of Canaan, and Canaan then went to a land and they called it after his name, Canaan, right? It's where Israel is today. It's where Joshua went in and conquered the land. Right, so what are we saying? We are saying before the flood, we've read in Genesis 6, verse 4 about these mighty men. Now in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, we find that after the flood, by the time Joshua wants to go conquer the land, Canaan, Ham's son was living there, and from the Canaanites had the same kind of characteristics. They were giants, and because the Israelites was too afraid to fight against them, they wandered around for 40 years in the wilderness. What happened in that time? Right? The Nephilim, these giants, these people were still in their cities in Canaan. So Joshua then goes and he drives out the inhabitants, but the Nephilim's descendants still remain there. After 40 years, when they went in, they cleaned out the land, but they didn't do it completely, and these Canaanites continued to live there. So let's just try and follow this through. The Nephilim spread out to the cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And some of them became part of the Philistine army. That is why Goliath, in 1 Samuel 7:17, you can find this all in the Bible, was a Philistine from Gath. So notice, after the flood and after Israel did not go in and was in the wilderness for 40 years, we then have a dispersion of these Nephilim people, and they became the Philistines, and they were in these cities, Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. You will all know where Gaza is today, and that kind of land there that's so much in the news today used to be Philistine country in the time of David. But Joshua did not clean the land completely of these people, but David did. David made an end of all the Nephilim by the time he had finished his reign. Now, you know, a lot of comparisons to Jesus should start ringing up in your mind now. And why this whole story is such a beautiful, if you interpret it correctly, a beautiful amplification or showing us what was to come in the future and with Jesus and when he comes again, and who is the real enemy and what is going to be destroyed. And it's all in the Bible. It's nothing mysterious, right? So have a look at this. The Nephilim remnants were wiped out by King David and his mighty men. 2 Samuel 21 verse 12. These four were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. 4 giants were slain, and it's in 2 Samuel 21, and I've just highlighted in red the giant and in blue who slayed him. So in 16 We have Abishai slaying Ishbi-Benob. Looks like these giants had giant names as well. Right. Then Sibbecai slew Seth, right? Son of a giant. Okay. All four were giants, right? And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, verse 19, and Elhanan slew the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, right? And then we read in verse 20, there was a battle again in Gath. There was a man of great stature. It says he had like, I think 12 or 11 fingers and stuff. He was giant and quite a abnormal one, I would think. And anyway, he defied Israel, just like Goliath did. Jonathan, the son of Shimei, the brother, slew him. And after this, you never read of giants again in the Bible. They are gone. The Nephilim does not exist anymore. No more Nephilim in the Bible. So whoever wants to think they are some weird angelic creatures carrying on in heaven right now, that's not what the Bible teaches. But this is what the Bible teaches more. David slew Goliath plus four more to get rid of the last five giants in the Bible. Maybe that's why David picked up 5 stones when he met up to go and kill Goliath. He knew he only needed one, and that the first one he was going to sling was going to kill Goliath. Why did he pick up 5? I do believe it had something to do with this. Maybe he didn't know, but that was what was going to happen. 5 stones for 5 giants, and those mighty men that forever were famous because they're so ungodly and arrogant and against God, and like Nimrod and Lamech, they were all subdued by a man, David, that is a prototype of Jesus, and showing us what Jesus will do in a greater extent when he came to earth and when he does come again. Right, so here are the important lessons to end off then, if we have the right understanding of the Bible. First of all, we should not marry unbelievers. When the sons of God marries the daughters of men, the consequences are always bad. They are not good. It causes unbelievable problems, destruction, and if we cannot learn those lessons from the Old Testament, then I don't know when we ever will. Okay, we must not be yoked with unbelievers. Those giants remained in the land of Israel until David finally wiped them out, but they gave Israel such a problem and made it so difficult and continued to make Israel stumble by taking on the beliefs and the customs of those people who remained in the land instead of conquering the land and giving God honor and glory by only doing his commandments. We should trust in God that he can slay our giants, right? If we keep on calling upon God's name, David says in the Psalms, that name of God is a refuge and a strong, mighty, tall tower. Right? So God's name is gigantic. It's huge. And we can run in there and find shelter there. That's why we don't scared of giants. God will take care of him, because there's no giant that can even come close to the God, the gigantic God that we worship. Very interesting that the number 5 in the Bible represents grace. We've done those studies on the numbers, again, from what the Bible says, not from outside proof or so on. And the number 5 is the number of grace in the Bible, but especially so in context of God being graceful to us when we, in weakness, are made strong, Paul says in the New Testament, so that God gets the glory. It's exactly what David did. This is why this number 5 is so beautifully linked with this whole story, because David faced Goliath with no armor and only a sling. and acknowledge we are weak and we need God to help us to win the battle, then God will make us and show us to be strong, and but he will get the glory, not us. And that is what, look at these words of David, right? He says, you come to me with a sword, Goliath, and a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. Here is the second ultimate, as far as I'm concerned, son of God after Jesus, David. And he says, I come to you, I call on the name of God and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day will Yahweh deliver you in my hand, and I will smite you and take your head from you, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is one God, a God in Israel. All right. So Jesus, the greater David, has slain the greatest enemy, sin. Jesus died on Golgotha, the place of the skull, which is where David went and buried the head of Goliath when he severed it from his body. He took it all the way up to Golgotha and buried it there. And years later, the greater David, Jesus, came, and he defeated the greatest enemy against God, that which separates man from God, sin, so that God can achieve what the whole Bible is about, to get man reconciled to him, because the only people who oppose God is man on earth. There is nothing in heaven that competes or disobeys God, right? So this is the great lessons that we find that fit in so nicely with, if we have the correct interpretation of Genesis. So at the end times, let's end off with this. At the end times, there will be a giant antichrist ruler of the whole world, in Revelation symbolically shown as a huge statue that Daniel 2 and King Nebuchadnezzar saw, a huge tall statue that everybody must worship. There will be this giant of a problem at the end of times. Jesus will come and destroy him too. He smashes that tall image with one stone, not cut out by human hands, like the stone David took from the river. It was a beautiful pebble, not made by men, but by God through nature. And God will use that same power he has for creating the world to help us with all our troubles. Even if the giants look big, they are minute, small against the God that we worship. So we can all take very much courage from that. Thank you.